Honda's VTEC system has become synonymous with rowdy kids and loud exhaust either getting gapped on the freeway or returning the favor to big ego Hellcat owners. VTEC changed the engine efficiency game and opened up the possibilities of engine tuning that would lead to other manufacturers producing some of the greatest engines of all time. But what is it about this complicated valve control system that makes these Honda 4-bangers so great? What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Sean, and today we are taking a look at how Honda's VTEC system changed the automotive game. Let's talk about it. From Civics to Integras to the legendary NSX, Honda's lineup of small, lightweight, fun-to-drive cars are no stranger to making solid power while also being surprisingly fuel efficient. And that's all thanks to a little thing called VTEC. VTEC is the system that allows Honda's 4-cylinder engines to be efficient little fuel-sipping machines when you're cruising around town or doing 25 through a school zone, but also loud honking rippers when you put your foot down on the on-ramp. Before we talk about how VTEC actually works, let's take a look at how VTEC came to be and how Honda came up with this slick piece of automotive engineering. All of the cars in Japan are actually taxed based on the displacement size of the engine. This means that every year when you go to register your car, you're going to be paying more for a car with a bigger engine versus a car with a smaller engine. This is one of the reasons why Japan has focused on 4 and 6-cylinder engines so much more than their V8 alternatives. Now, having a fuel-efficient 4-cylinder is great for the masses, but there are some of us that want to have a little bit more fun. The problem is that fuel-efficient engines don't normally make great power, and that is where VTEC comes into play. VTEC was originally introduced alongside the B16A 4-cylinder engine in the 1989 Acura Integra. The Integra was an absolute game changer as it came with disc brakes on all 4 wheels and retuned suspension for better handling. The 1990 Integra GSR was released with fully independent, double wishbone suspension that would become a staple for the Integra platform for the rest of its lifetime. But the biggest innovation that came along with the Integra was, of course, VTEC. Now, for a detailed explanation of exactly how VTEC works, let's jump over to the garage and take a closer look. Alright, so we are here in the garage with my K24A2 for my Subaru BRZ engine swap. So before we jump into how VTEC works, I've got to get all this stuff disassembled and then we'll talk about it. So now that I've got the valve cover off, we can start to talk about how VTEC works. I've got my intake camshafts on this side and my exhaust camshaft on the side closest to you guys. So that's the side I'm mostly going to be working on to give this explanation. So on most standard engines these days, you've got dual overhead camshafts, which effectively just means that you have 2 camshafts inside the head segment of the engine. And what these camshafts do is they typically have 1 or 2 different teardrop-shaped lobes that actually open and close the valves that allow either the intake and the fuel to come in or the exhaust to make its way out. And so the thing that makes VTEC different is that there are actually 3 of these lobes versus just 2. And normally, under normal conditions, when you're just cruising around at low RPM and low throttle position, this middle camshaft is actually floating. So the rocker right here that it rides on is essentially floating. So this middle rocker is on a spring and it's just kind of out of the way, and this larger center lobe is not functioning. You are driving by the 2 outer lobes. So at some point when you want to start driving more aggressively, you get to that back road or you hit that interstate on-ramp and you want to give it full throttle and full power. Once you get above a certain RPM and a certain oil pressure and a handful of other different criteria that the ECU registers, it says now is the time to activate VTEC. So it sends a signal to the VTEC solenoid, which effectively pushes oil pressure through this center rocker. And when that happens, it pushes a pin through the outer 2 rockers and the center one, effectively locking these 3 rockers together. And so what that means is that now, instead of riding on the 2 outer rockers, which are smaller, they have less duration and a lower lift. Now, all of these rockers are effectively being affected by the center larger lobe that has longer duration and a higher amount of lift. So whenever that VTEC actuator, it locks all three of these rockers, you start to ride on the larger camshaft profile, and all of a sudden you're getting more air coming in, more fuel coming in, staying open for longer so you can get more and more of that air and fuel in, as well as it's leaving the exhaust valve open longer to be able to remove more of that unburnt air fuel mixture. And now that you have a larger amount of that air fuel mixture coming into the cylinder, when that spark plug fires, you're going to get a stronger combustion, basically meaning more power. And that circumstance of these three rockers being connected will continue until you start to back off of the throttle and that oil pressure drops. Once that pressure drops, the ECU will convey to the solenoid to back that pin out that was previously connecting these three rockers, and this center rocker will start to float again, and this center camshaft lobe will effectively become inactive, meaning that you will get less power and better fuel economy on these two small outer lobes, versus when you want the extra power and you're not concerned about the fuel economy, you're going to be running on the larger cam profile, giving you more air and fuel, more power, and more torque.
Thanks for that explanation. Honda's introduction of the VTEC system absolutely changed the game. It meant that you could drive around town nice and responsibly through those pesky school zones, but you could drive like an absolute madman on those curvy back roads. There's nothing quite like hitting VTEC for the first time, and once you experience that, many people are hooked from the jump. I remember the first time I drove an S2000, and that immediate bump in power around 6,000 RPM, there's just nothing like it for a first-time car enthusiast. Only a few short years after Honda's introduction of the VTEC system, other manufacturers started to introduce their own versions of smart valve control. Toyota launched engines such as the 1J and 2JZ with the VVTi option. This is their variable valve timing system that is similar to VTEC, but is different in that it has one small cam and one large cam, but it is still activated by oil pressure and an activation pin. BMW introduced their Vanos system, which controls the timing of the valve by changing the position of the camshaft relative to the drive gear. This gives you the ability to change the timing of when the intake and exhaust valves open, but it doesn't allow you to change the lift or the duration since the cam shape is constant. Soon after VTEC's introduction, other car manufacturers like Ford and even Porsche would begin to introduce their own alternatives to VTEC. And that is going to wrap it up for this one, guys. Leave me a comment down below. What is your favorite VTEC powered car? Mine is probably the S2000, if not for the C30 6-cylinder series engine from the Honda NSX. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you give it a thumbs up down below. If you want to see more content like this, or if you want to see my Subaru BRZ K24 engine swap series, then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. And until next time, build your dreams.